Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. Richard, thank you so much for meeting me here in Madison, which is where you're not from here, but you have been living here for a while, I think. 20 years. Okay. Yep. That's a while. That qualifies. I'm so excited to talk to you today about your story, about your mom's story, your grandparents' story. You have such a generational tale, and you finished your mother's memoir after she passed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the little bit that I have read about you, it is a very sweeping journey. I mean, you've got 3 generations that you cover. So I don't want to do most of the talking. I would love to turn it over to you. What inspired you to finish that memoir and have it published?
So let me see. So foremost, Jennifer, thank you very much for having me on your show, on your podcast, and for flying in from Philadelphia to interview me in person. It's a new experience for me. I've been doing all of this using, I guess, some kind of Zoom device or app.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest, if I had known what I know now, I would have never delved into my mother's memoir,
really?
Let alone trying to complete it. But it was a promise made on the fly. I visited her in her nursing home. This would be Brookline, Massachusetts. She had been there for about 10 years, and she was dying from some form of dementia, likely Alzheimer's disease. And I was trying to talk to her. Of course, she hadn't been responding to me in any forms for quite some time. And so it was a monologue. And I basically said, why wouldn't you want to leave and be free on the other side, wherever the other side is, right? And when I was leaving her, I usually spent about 30 minutes with her when I was leaving. So I suddenly thought, oh, maybe you're worried about who was going to finish your memoir. And I said, how about I'll do it and you can leave in peace. And so she died 3 months later after hanging in there for a decade in that nursing home, on that nursing home bed. And so I think she somehow heard me and decided that now I have someone finishing it off. And so I was left holding the bag. And I had no idea how I would complete this task.
Yeah, that's monumental. Like, how did you even start? Where, even emotionally, how did you start to tackle that?
Yeah, so that would be 2014. So from the beginning to the end, it will be just a little bit south of 10 years. I first went to my mother's apartment. My late father, he passed away literally 10 months after my mother passed away. And so I asked him where her manuscripts were kept. And so he handed me these 3 boxes full of manuscripts and notes, and there were over 1,000 pages.
Wow.
So that's where I got started. And that's where I realized how daunting it was. Yeah. And that's why I was honest at the very beginning. I said, if I know what I know now, I wouldn't have done this.
That's fair. So, that's fair. So, take us back, I guess, because obviously your story is one that has been informed by the generations that came before you. And I think that's something that we all have, but not necessarily that we've all spent time reflecting on. So you're in kind of a unique experience in that your story is obviously very intertwined with your mother's, but you've spent a lot of time in your mother's story. So tell me a little bit about your mother. What was her life like?
Yeah, so you touched on a point, I think, It's a very good point. Even my mother said this back in the early 1980s when people were encouraging her to put her stories down on a piece of paper and publish it as a book. So she said that everyone's life is book-worthy, but not everyone would sit down and write about their life and dredging up the past. Right? So why would my life be worthwhile to the modern reader, meaning the readers back in the 1980s? And I'm such an ordinary human being. And so then later on, she realized she was indeed an ordinary human being, but she lived an extraordinary life because she had the opportunity of encountering all these extraordinary people and historical events. She was witness to the history, I would say, during one of the potentially worst period a period of growth in humanity, at least in the 20th century. So then she wanted to sit down and write this book and honor all these people. And so I kind of inherited that, the theme from whatever she left for me. I'm not so sure I totally answered your question.
Oh, no, that's okay.
But yeah, I was just thinking
I think it's a good point,
So I appreciate her spirit of writing this memoir. Yeah. It's not about herself. The memoir is about her life, but really is not. It really is about people that she had the fortune of encountering.
Yeah.
She wanted to remember them.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah. No, I think it's a beautiful sentiment, and I think it's important because I've been reflecting on this recently with the death of my grandmother that happened in February, and I've actually talked about it on the show. We all leave legacies, and we all inherit legacies. And generational stories are so important, and they've been important for as long as humans have existed, right? Storytelling has been a part of our DNA forever. Right. And so somewhere along the way, we've lost a little bit of that. And I don't know if it's because of technology or our instant gratification, but we've lost a little bit of the understanding of the inherent value of our experiences and our stories. And so I think it is important to slow down and just take a look back and reflect. And once you do take the time to talk to people, you usually do find that there is something there that that just touches you in a very special, very human way. And so it is important to take the time and tell the stories, record the stories, tell the stories after people are gone, because that's how we remember them.
I think storytelling is one of the best ways of remembering our past, remembering history, and then that will be beginning to accept our past. And if we don't accept our past, how do we not repeat history? Yeah. So, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point. And also just understanding where we come from, why maybe people think the way that they do, that two people can experience the same event and have a completely different perspective on it. Right. I mean, it's pretty fascinating when you think of it like that, right? That we can all experience something, millions of us can experience something together and all walk away with a little bit of a different perspective.
Yeah, that's the annoying part of humanity, but also the redeeming part of humanity. Right?
Yeah, so, exactly. Exactly. So I'd love to just dive into what your mom's story was and who she was, what her history and growing up was like.
Yeah, so she was born in 1931, and during one of the most catastrophic, I guess, natural disaster of the 20th century. So she was born into a dirt poor farmer's family in a small, I guess, farming village on the northern banks of this river called Yangtze River. It's one of the longest river, I guess, in Asia, in the world, right? Probably the longest in China. I start losing all those statistics. And usually the river by her town was about a mile wide, and during the height of the flood, it was about 20 miles wide. So it was wiping out all these farmers. And the flood killed about upwards of 4 million people from drowning, ranging from drowning to starvations and then also infectious diseases thereafter. And she was fortunate, A, to live, B, to have a biological mother who had understanding that not to leave her on the roadside to die because she was already number 7 or number 8. I guess she would have, 6 or 7 older brothers, sisters already. And they were so poor that they couldn't afford to feed another mouth. So her biological mother was looking for milk and food for her and heard about these American missionaries and Western missionaries were setting up these refugee camps on the southern banks of the river. So they rode across 20 miles and met, I guess, my American grandparents and begged them to adopt my mother. So they adopted my mother when my mother was about 10 months old. And then from there on, her life was just a totally different life from where she was born. Right? And she had this idyllic childhood surrounded by Western missionaries and English-speaking people, and she attended English-speaking kindergarten and schools and so on. And then that would be her beginning, actually. Very drastically different, 2 different periods within just a matter of 10 months. Right? So one was to die and the other is to live. So,
Did your grandparents adopt any other children?
So my American grandparents by that time had been in China for, I guess, 1916, about 15 years or so.
Oh, wow.
They used their own money to build a hospital and also build schools. And there were many Western missionaries, American missionaries in that town. It was a hotbed of missionaries. Right? And actually has a deep history of deep history of mission history, I guess, for China. And so during those 15 years, they adopted many Chinese girls, mostly are teenagers or if they're actually well into their 20s. And they would support them to go to school and actually college and so on, education anyway. And none of them were formally adopted, let alone adopted at the age of 10 months. And my mother was formally adopted with the paperwork from U.S. Supreme Court stationed in Shanghai in 1940. So 9 years later, they officially made that completely official, meaning that she technically was an American citizen, but a Chinese-born American citizen. Right?
Wow.
So,
That is quite the drastic change.
Right.
Did your mom ever go back to the area that she was born?
She had to because her biological parents will make visits mainly to look for resources, food, and money from my American grandparents in the name of to visit her. But I bet that was also part of it. And then on and off, they had a few interactions during her first, I guess, 20 years of her life until they sort of lost touch or her biological parents passed away.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah. Wow. So how long then did she stay living in China, or did your American grandparents end up leaving China at some point?
Yeah, so Japan swept through southern part of China because the Yangtze River runs across southern part of China. And of course, Japan also swept through the most part of Southeast Asia. At that time, America was not at war with Japan yet, so they allowed my American grandparents to keep the hospital open, functional, and they also need a hospital. And they my American grandfather was a highly skilled surgeon, right? So, but then Pearl Harbor, December 8, 1941, and so then suddenly we were at war with Japan, and so my mother was repatriated with her parents, American parents. And she ended up spending about 3 years living in Yonkers, New York. Finished her elementary school there and attending junior high school.
Wow.
Before returning to China. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So quite a difference.
Yes. Returning to China in 1945, literally on VE Day, May 8th, 1945, my American grandparents uplifted her from her classroom and put her on a U.S. battleship en route to Africa because they wanted to go back. Because, the war, they thought the war was over. They wanted to go back to China to continue their medical missions. And they were bent on bringing their daughter back with them because she is actually Chinese.
Yeah.
And she should continue their mission when she grows up to serve Chinese people, right? So much to her dismay, she hated her parents for uplifting her from Yonkers classroom, Yonkers, New York, and leaving America altogether.
Wow.
And so
I can't imagine, but she had so much change in such a short amount of time. Right. Such a short life span at that point, right? Yeah. She's still very much a child.
Right. Yes, she was 11 when they came ashore in New York Harbor. 1942, and she left. I guess she was 15, not quite 15, right? And then they actually spent a year in India because American missionaries in India, after they passed through Africa, they ultimately arrived in Mumbai, and they said you can't go back to China because Japan hadn't surrendered yet, and so they convinced them to stay a little longer. So they spent a year in India. And my mother actually attended a boarding school built by British missionaries in the Himalayas.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was just trying to follow up what you said. She had, within first 16 years of her life, she had this drastic experiences, rich experiences of anyone could beg for in life.
Truly.
Right? So,
So all different people from all different walks of life. During war, during natural disaster.
Yes.
I mean, that's...
And then different cultures and... Right.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Traveling around the world.
Truly. Yeah. Now, did she like to travel?
She did.
Okay.
She appreciated the fact that she saw Africa, she saw Egypt, and she climbed the pyramid. And she spent time in Mumbai, saw Gandhi, who was on one of these hunger strikes. And then spent a year at this British boarding school with all these British kids. And then some are Indian kids. And so, she felt like she had lived a full life already at the age 16.
I imagine. Yeah.
Right. That's why this book will be interesting in that perspective in terms of history. That she had a chance to witness. Right.
So many things. Yes. And you kind of alluded to that earlier on when you said she realized she was an ordinary person that had seen and experienced extraordinary things and people.
Right.
And I mean, I would argue that she's pretty extraordinary herself, but it is interesting just to bear witness, right?
Yes.
To these times in history that you don't know that what you're living through is going to be as significant as it is.
Right. And I've told a few people, and they don't mind, they didn't seem to mind anyway, my analogy, that her first 19 years of her life, or the first part of this memoir, first half of this memoir, really reminisces of Forrest Gump.
Okay.
She just has this luck of running into these people or running into these historical events.
That's very interesting. And I think Americans will very much be able to identify with that. A national treasure. So they spend a year in India. They go back to China. How long were they in China?
So then that would be 1946. They finally went back to China, and her parents reopened the hospital and their mission work. And then she was to finish off her high school in an English-speaking school. But lo and behold, civil war broke out between Communist Army and, of course, at the time, the government is called Republican Nationalist, now the government of Taiwan. And after about 3 years, the Communist Army won, and they swept through southern part of China. And lo and behold, they were very orderly and respectful towards my grandparents, mainly because they also need hospitals, functional hospitals, and highly skilled surgeons. So it's funny. It doesn't matter what revolution you need doctors, right? So they managed to stay for about maybe eight months or so, maybe less than a year, a little less than a year. Korean War began, and that was the war preceded the Cold War, and that was a proxy war between America and China. And so they were driven out of China. My grandparents were driven out of China instantly, overnight. And they had to flee because anti-American fervor was at all-time high. My mother was 300 miles away at the English-speaking college called Smith College. Literally, it's called Jingling, but it's a sister college of Smith College in I guess, New Hampton, Massachusetts. She was trapped. She couldn't make it back to leave with her American parents. So she was trapped in China from 1949 to 1980 when she came back to the States and brought me with her.
Wow.
Yes.
She could not leave it before then.
By the time she made it back to her hometown, her parents were long gone. And then she didn't have sufficient paperwork to say, I want to leave too. I'm also American.
Yeah.
But you're not, you're Chinese, right? So, right.
Wow. Right. I'm just trying to imagine what she was even thinking in that moment.
She was 19.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So she was totally devastated. And I think back on when I was 19, I thought I knew everything. Mm-hmm. I understood just about anything if you talk to me. But now I'm 60 years old and I look back on it, I knew nothing, hardly anything, right? So when I was compiling my mother's memoir, I tried to envision a 19-year-old girl whose first language is English and spoke terrible Chinese, had little understanding of Chinese history and culture, and then suddenly became a foreigner in her own birth country and got trapped, and what that would be like, right? I bet she also thought she understood everything, but then realized she understood nothing. Yeah. Right, next to nothing.
Wow. Yeah. Now, did your mom talk about a lot of this with you, or did you find this out afterwards while reading her manuscripts?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. So in that sense, I often tell people too, my life kind of mirrors my mother's, because I was 14 and she uplifted me from a junior high classroom and literally Shanghaied me onto a Pan Am flight. Oh, wow. And then it was on the flight. Of course, we actually, more details, we went to Japan first. And so I was on a Pan Am flight from Tokyo. But that was when she told me her life story. And I was just shocked that she had been brought up by Americans. She spoke English as a first language. She had lived in America. And my grandparents were actually Americans. And we're going to America and we're not coming back. And so there was also, to my dismay and begrudgingly, I got onto the airplane and not knowing where we were going, right? And I left all my friends, maybe potentially my dreams behind as soon as we landed, touchdown in JFK. So it was shell-shocking, right? So to me.
I can only imagine.
So, and I instantly understood why my mother spoke Chinese with an accent.
Oh, yes. Okay. So you're 14 and you know none of this.
None of this.
Wow. That must have been such a... I don't know. I'm trying to now put myself in your shoes at 14 because you're not so young, right? You're decently old enough
to understand many things, right? But young enough to, again, understand next to nothing. And all of this, again, was a total surprise, put it mildly to me. And also realizing that what my mother was telling me was that she was coming home. Yeah. America was her home. Wow. So, which made no sense to me.
Sure.
China was my home.
Sure.
We left my older sister, my father behind, so the family got split in halves. And it made no sense to me to do that. Yeah. Right. So, and again, I was excelling in school and I was thinking about becoming a journalist and a writer. And then once we were in New York City, I had to start from A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So.
Wow. So, after your mom, or after, I guess, your American grandparents left and your mom was then by herself, how did she start to rebuild her life?
So in that sense, she, I guess from my perspective, in my eyes, she was an extraordinary woman, a very resilient one, courageous one. At the age of 19, she figured out that this might not be just a couple months, right? This might be much longer than she thought it would be. The war could last for years. So she needed to learn the language, hide her accent, because she looked, Chinese, as long as she doesn't open her mouth. Right? and the other thing she did was she tried to find a local to marry to.
Okay,
that would be my father. And he turned out to be one of those people that she will want to remember and honor because essentially he helped saved her life.
Wow.
Right. So, and try to hide her deficiencies in terms of understanding this culture.
Yeah.
So she did all those things. And then again, she was so fortunate that the Chinese government realizing her past, but did not try to persecute, the communist government did not try to persecute her right away, except they understood that at the time when they took over the country, they need two professions. She was already a college freshman, right, sophomore. And so they need teachers and they need physicians. So they just did this.
Yeah.
And my mother got shuffled into the physicians, the pile.
Yeah.
And she became an ophthalmologist and a highly skilled surgeon. And that turned out to be a saving point also for her later in her life in terms of surviving China.
Yeah.
Surviving Mao's China.
Yeah.
So she was resilient. She had people helping her. And she was also fortunate and lucky.
I can imagine, I mean, I can't, but I'm trying to imagine how scary it would be just to be left alone like that all of a sudden, but then to know that you have these deficiencies, and you know what I mean when I say that word.
Yeah, right. No.
That anything at any time could happen, and who do you trust?
Right.
And so she found your father who protected her.
Right.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I know. Right. And yes, she was. So it's also interesting too. What I learned about my mother was a completely different human being from what I experienced as a kid, as I was growing up. And so now I know my mother was just another human being because she was scared, right? She was afraid for her life. And she was wondering how she would survive this culture and this world she's completely unfamiliar with. And she was afraid to open her mouth because once she opens her mouth, many people would stare at her. Where are you from? Even though Chinese language is an interesting language, has many dialects depending on where you're from, which corner of the country you're from. But most people probably didn't know that kind of an accent, right? A Western sort of accent, right? So yes, my father helped her transition to, I guess, to survive China.
Yeah,
yes.
That's incredible.
Right.
And the amount of trust it must have taken for your mom to put into somebody else when knowing that her life was literally on the line or could have been on the line.
Yes. Yeah. Totally on the line.
Yeah.
Except she constantly just ran into these people and then even her professors who turned out to be those who educated in Europe or in America, right? So they kind of knew, right, who she was, right? And pretending not to know, but trained her as an ophthalmologist, as a medical student. And even during her internship, a lot of people figured her out pretty quickly and even tried to utilize her skills in English at the time when China still allowed all these medical journals to come from abroad that are in English. She helped them translating them and so on. And so then she was able to adapt. Of course, she had her own gumptions and courage, but still, with all these people, it would be a very different story.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And it really, the people we meet along the way really do affect our lives, for sure. So, I mean, she spent a pretty significant time in China until she was able to leave. Did she always have in the back of her mind that she was going to leave as soon as she could? Or did she try to settle into life there and think like this is just the way it's going to be forever?
I think she accepted the fact that she probably will spend the rest of her life in China.
Yeah.
Right? Especially during Mao's Cultural Revolution. And it was devastating not just to people like her or my father, but just to the whole country, the whole nation. Right? So, but lo and behold, during that trying period, Nixon visited China, right? And secretly. And then so Chinese people found out, I guess a year later, a little bit later. And that gave her hope. And of course, then the ongoing Vietnam War which was another proxy war between China and America, although to a much lesser extent than the Korean War. She was giving up until of course, the revolution ended in 1976. Mao passed away. The two events are hand in hand. And China reopened to the West, outside world. Right? So, right.
And I think I read you were one of the first teenagers to leave after the revolution ended.
Yes, China reopened to the West by 1978. And to be honest, most Chinese people believe they were liberated in 1978, not 1949 when Mao's army first took over China.
Wow. Okay.
Those were devastating 3 decades in Chinese history, modern history anyway. So in 1978, when they reopened to the West, to Europe, to America, Westerners just flooded in. Because for 30 years, China was pretty much closed behind the border or the forbidden walls, right? So the Westerners were curious what China was like, and they also just, salivating over this market. Right? So it's all about capitalism. And so there were so many conferences are being scheduled and being held, and they realized, wait a minute, you spoke perfect English, right? Now you understand enough Chinese, right? So why don't you translate for us? So my mother became a professional interpreter during that time.
Oh, interesting.
And even interpreted for the president of Communist China at the time. Right? So personal translator for that person in 1978. And lo and behold, Americans came. And then she was just looking for Americans. She got tired of translating for Grecians and the French and Germans. And Americans came, and was a doctor from Mass General Hospital said, "Where did you get your New York accent?" And they started talking, and this person began to locate my American side of the family. And then he helped my mother coming out. And then that was when she decided to bring me out with her.
Now, so I'm just kind of realizing this. Did your mom not have any contact with her family after they left?
Not at all. Wow. I guess my American grandfather passed away in 1958, and my American grandmother in 1961. Oh. To qualify that, when they adopted my mother, my grandfather probably was 55 or 56. Okay. My grandmother was 48 or 9.
Yeah.
So they were almost like grandparents.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. So they were pretty old.
Yeah.
Right. So she never got to see her parents again, and I never met my American grandparents.
Okay.
Right. So
was that something, learning that after the fact must have been hard, knowing that, she had no way to access that information or even access them.
Yes.
Yeah.
In her writing, I'm sorry.
No, please.
No, in her writing, I found that she, from time to time, if not every year, she was counting her parents' age and gradually losing hope that she will see them again. And then also with that, accepting that her life is here to stay.
Yeah.
Because they constantly remind her that she is Chinese. She should always foremost help Chinese people. And that's what she did. And she was a highly skilled surgeon, also like her father, right, essentially. And she helped many people, iron need. And she even helped a couple of communist high-ranking officials. Turned out to be the people that she also want to honor and remember, because these are people across the ideological lines to help her.
Yeah.
And to answer your earlier question, how I came out as likely the only teenager who came out with a private passport, these high-ranking officials helped arrange. Wow. They knew my mom's story, right? So they helped my mother get her passport and mine. And it's unheard of in 1979. Right, for China just reopened, right? You can come out as a diplomat or as some kind of official, but not as a private citizen coming out on an American visa and then here's a Chinese passport. And so so they were among the people that my mother will want to remember, recognize.
Yeah,
right? And these are communists, right? Again.
And she didn't think she was extraordinary.
So the second half, I told people, is kind of like a Schindler's List. There are all these people coming out of woodwork.
Yeah.
And to think about, she can survive for 30 years as a foreigner in her own birth country and witnessing all everything that was unfolding around her from a perspective of Westerner, essentially, right? Wondering, nothing made sense to her. And she was able to live through all of that. It's got to be a lot of people helped out.
Yeah.
So, right.
Incredible. So the decision for you and your mom to go and to leave your father and sister behind, I assume that was out of necessity.
Yeah.
But why was it you that your mom took with her?
Yeah, so it was out of necessity. And my father also knew that my mother wanted to go home eventually and that his job was done, right? And my sister is 6 years my senior. She suffered from cerebral palsy when she was born in 1960. And that's also a very interesting part of the story where my mother and my father, I guess, and also people around my mother at the time struggled to understand how to raise a child with disabilities and physical disability. And I think it was a time in this world, America included, people didn't know how to deal with people with disabilities, let alone raise a child with disabilities, right? So I think all those disability acts were more 1980s and 1990s, right?
Yeah.
Creating these handicapped entrants and so on. And so it was very interesting that my mother went through that experience in terms of finding ways and even building a homemade wheelchair, things of that sort.
Wow.
So that part might be touching to certain group of people with a similar situation. Right? So then bringing me out was the only option. She thought she was not going to be able to handle my sister in America. And I was younger, right? So I could attend school, maybe build a life in America. So, right.
Did your father and sister make it over to America eventually?
Yeah, so that was another, I guess, tidbit or anecdote. My mother thought she was just going to be repatriated. It would just matter a month or maybe a year or two, and then she will bring them out, immigrate them, right, as American citizen. Of course, that didn't happen, right? It took about 18 years for her to get her citizenship. So my sister didn't come out till 25 years later. So 2004, my father came out a little bit earlier, but predicated upon the fact that he had to retire earlier from his career. He became a world-renowned agronomist. He was very well known for developing hybrids and crossbreeding of rice crops and, of course, genetic engineering. I know that's controversial, but he was among the earliest generations to come up with those ideas to solve famine, problems with famine, world hunger, right? And so then he reluctantly, begrudgingly quit his job and immigrated over because my mom was beginning to show signs of deterioration. And so he came out to take care of my mom. She came out late 90s. And my sister, 2004. So 25 years later, we were reunited, four of us.
Wow. And there was you did not see each other in those 25 years?
I saw my father a few times.
Okay.
And then, of course, by 1999, I made my pilgrimage.
Okay.
I visited China for the first time after I left about 20 years, right?
Yeah.
In between. And I saw my sister for the first time. And she had just gotten divorced, was raising a 2-year-old kid because her husband was beating her up. And I mean, I couldn't fathom why would anyone would do that to anyone, let alone a physically challenged woman, right? Why did you marry her to begin with, right? And she was pregnant and had a kid, right? So I saw her then. That would be 19 years pretty much in between. Wow. And then 5 years later, she immigrated. She and her son live in Boston right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible. I think it's something that Americans in general, if they have not had any immigration in their recent history, it's hard for us to fathom families being split up like that and spending literal decades apart from each other. But there are so many places around the world where it's just the reality, it's real life, and people have to contend with that. Right. And I think it's such a good reminder that, it is real life. This does happen quite often. Right. And people have to find the strength to just keep going and keep living life.
Yeah. Like what we were saying earlier, right? Without storytelling, we tend to forget our past. And a lot of these first, second, third, even even first generation tend to forget, let alone third, fourth generation American born here. They don't remember what their grandparents went through. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's fair, right? I mean, that's how we are built or wired. But, I think, me included, no one will be in their right mind to leave their motherland and to leave their mother tongue, mother language, if it weren't for fleeing something, some kind of disaster, natural or man-made, like war, genocide, right?
Yeah.
These people at the border, or people like me, luckily got it in 1980, right? I guess in hindsight, I mean, I didn't know, I didn't want to leave, but my mother wanted to. My mother was fleeing.
Yeah.
After 30 years, she had no trust of this government, this country, this culture. Right? And so she brought me out with her. And so I think most of the immigrants have very similar stories. And I think even like what you just said, Americans here today, their grandparents, great-grandparents, or ancestors definitely had similar stories, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I know some of my ancestors' story. Others is so far back that I don't know. But yeah, it is. If we don't continue to tell those stories, we lose an empathy for people that are still experiencing things that our ancestors have experienced, but we haven't personally experienced.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, the messaging, of course, matters too. I'm just listening to you talk about your life in China and your mother's life in China. And I just keep thinking about, history is told by different perspectives, different people living different perspectives, and kind of how we can all experience something and walk away with a different anecdote about it. I do think it's very interesting to think about how like the West frames history and historical events versus all other places. And I do think that's a very important and valuable thing to talk about in terms of we have our perspective, but first of all, we didn't live that. And second of all, that doesn't mean it's the only perspective that holds value. And in fact, the people that are closest to it should be taking the front, seats in telling that story.
Right.
So to that end, how, and you can talk about this as much or as little as you want, but how has it been for you over the years to kind of experience that difference? You lived through your time in China, you lived through, or you at least know what your mom went through. Obviously, she wanted to be here in America, but I'm certain the messaging is completely different when, coming from America to China and vice versa.
Right. I think, that's a very deep question. So I think I'm still struggling with that.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is I am grateful now I am in America. I'm an American citizen. I appreciate the fact that my mother brought me out. I have a good life here, right? But it certainly took decades, if not, because it's still ongoing, if not half a century of my life, of the time to figure out what all this really means to me. Because I didn't want to leave China, but mainly because my family and my friends. And you were at the age where friends, family are most important, right? And of course, I was born at the onset of Mao's Cultural Revolution, a catastrophic event, one of the most disastrous, man-made disaster, I guess, lack of a better word. So in that sense, I also mirror my mother, right? She was born in a natural disaster. I was born man-made disaster. And so I knew China was impoverished and essentially living in the ashes of their own making, right? And so coming to America, I realized it was just all this glittering, and it was shell-shocking to me to listen to my mother's story about witnessing this otherworldly place. And it was very distracting for me to think what was going on. And immediately my mother stopped speaking Chinese to me and wanted me to learn English. Of course, I had a much help from her. She was good, right? So, and then I spent 20 years then following her calling, try to become an all-American and understanding everything about American culture and catching up with things that I missed in 1960s and 50s or even further back.
Yeah.
And until I went to, and I was surrounded by my American families. They're all white, right? So that's great, right? And I feel very comfortable. These are fantastic people. Many of them dedicate their lives for people in dire straits, right? The missionaries, right? Christians. And so, and then I went to schools where I practically was the only Asian, not just Chinese, right? So, and I was very comfortable also. And until I went to grad school, I realized I started meeting people from abroad. Abroad meaning outside America.
Yeah.
And I started finding myself wasn't so much of this American I thought I was. And I was actually speaking with an accent that I couldn't shake. And I'm Chinese. And then so I took a U-turn in the last 20 years, including the 9-10 years for this memoir. And suddenly I'm at the crossroad where, who am I, right? I begin to dread her again for destroying my life, my understanding of my birth country, my birth culture, understanding my birth language. And here I'm caught in between. I'm neither. When I tell people I can speak a little bit of Chinese and English, and he can't speak either. Right? So it became very difficult for me in the last 20 years. And then I finally have come to a point where I'm kind of accepting the fact I'm neither. I've been learning, and it was during this process of promoting her memoir in the last 18 months. People constantly tell me this phrase, third culture, right? You're neither, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are using this phrase and try to find ways to accept that as a starting point, I guess, and then move from that point on to maybe celebrate to the point you can celebrate your own identity, being neither or third.
Yeah.
So I find writing this memoir or completing this memoir became a redemptive exercise for me, even though at plenty of moments I dreaded. I hated my mother.
Yeah.
I so hated my promising to her. But yeah, right. I don't know if I truly answer your question.
No, that was beautiful. And, I don't know how you walk through something like writing your mother's memoir and finding things out about her life without going through the array of emotions and how it doesn't affect your personal view and perspective. Because it is, I think as kids, sometimes we have the ability to plaster over some of our wounds and kind of ignore that they're there.
Right.
And just maybe not even realize that we ever had them to begin with until we're confronted with something that then forces us to take a step back and examine it and say, oh, actually, there's something, there's a scab there or something that, you know. And I think it's a very valuable experience to walk through, but it's hard.
It is. And it took 20 years, but took writing this memoir, or editing this memoir. And I remember my therapist told me several times that first part of my life, or at least first part of my life in America, I was constantly putting these bricks in this bag and carrying them or sweeping everything underneath the rug. And now I've begun a journey. This will be early 2000s of trying to shedding them one by one.
Yeah.
And then she said, it's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a long time, but it will get lighter and lighter. Right? So.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only way to do it, right? Is doing the hard work.
Right.
Otherwise, you just keep carrying the burden.
But I've come to a point where I think I actually appreciate to have an opportunity to actually shed them, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
My mother included. I think writing her memoir for about 11 or 12 years practically just killed her, because she suffered from depression in early 1990s. And she actually battled through that, came around, but by early 90s, she started showing signs. By late 90s, she started showing signs of dementia. Yeah. Depression is one of the major leading causes for early dementia. So I think two things are related, and she died from Alzheimer's disease, I guess.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I find myself just wishing, which I'm sure you did as well as you walked through this process to a much larger degree, but I just find myself wishing your mom was here so I could ask her. So like just so many things about how she was feeling, yes. Because it's one thing to walk through life. It's another thing to, experience life and feel the things that come with the triumphs and the devastation.
Right. I mean, that was one of the biggest struggles I had was how do I write and think and see things through her lens, right? And even though we're related by DNA, it's embedded in me. I pretty much sound like her, but there wouldn't be no way I would be able to understand exactly how she felt and how she saw things. I could only do the best I could in terms of her perspectives. But yeah, and not just be great for her to just tell her own stories. And there were just numerous times during those 9 trying years trying to complete a memoir, I would be looking up the sky saying, bleep, blop, you, come down and finish your own memoir.
I am done.
Yes, right. And then somehow she will find a way to drag me back into it, just like how she dragged me onto the airplane to come to America with her, right?
She's a strong woman.
She was, yeah. Strong-willed and courageous and brave. And those are the personas I saw, experienced.
Yeah.
Right? So,
how was it with your dad as you were? I mean, I know he wasn't around for a lot longer after she passed, but clearly he knew that this was something that you were going to start doing. Right. How was that from his perspective?
I interviewed my father for many stories in this memoir because I had to fill a lot of gaps, especially the ones that took place in 1950s, 60s, and 70s, where even when I understood some, there's no way I would understand the gravity of the situation, right? And he was very good at helping me with some of the stories, even though some of them you could never finish. He was extremely grateful that I wanted to do this. Because he said, I tried to write them in Chinese. I couldn't do it.
Oh, wow.
And, there's some manuscripts here in Chinese. You can find someone to help you with that because my Chinese was really bad by then. And maybe that will be useful for you. But I even tried to translate what she had written, and that was not very good. So I'm done. So it's all yours, right? And I'm glad you want to do this, and good luck.
Yeah.
Those were fleeting moments where he and I actually had a civil conversations because we didn't have much of a relationship. Right? So as soon as I was born, I think it was about 10 months old, he was sent to a labor camp, Stalin labor camp. This is Mao's Cultural Revolution.
Oh my
they were persecuting all the intellectuals, right? Highly educated people. And my father criticized the government 10 years earlier for some of their economic or agriculture policies that were implementing. Because he was actually very smart, right? I was telling you, he became a world-renowned agronomist. And he was just this all-spoken person, right? Just all. And so he was gone. I didn't see him till I was 4 or 5. I didn't know who he was. And I called him Sir for the longest time. And by the time that he came around, we were about to have some kind of relationship. I was on that Pan Am flight.
Oh.
And so then, intervening years where he may have visited America for a couple of times and we will see each other maybe for a couple of hours at the airport. And that was about it until he immigrated. And then he and I had this totally different perspective in life. And he didn't recognize me as a son. I wouldn't recognize him as a father.
Sure.
Until my mother passed away. So I had those 10 months to sit down and try to patch up certain.
Now, did your sister have a different relationship because she was a little bit older when he would have been sent away?
Yeah. So my sister and my father are, of course, very close. Okay. And she and I were very close up until I left. And so that relationship ended as soon as I was boarded. Right. So, but it was also very interesting too, because it was her and it was us against the world. Right. My mother, again, was saved by being a physician. Because they sent my father away. My father was even on an execution list briefly for interacting with the Russian scientists. And so he was charged with treason because Russia and China were not in good terms at that time diplomatically. And so they allowed my mother to stay at the hospital, continue to work. because they need doctors. But she was constantly whisked away to these countrysides, rural areas for these reforms of re-education programs. So it was just my sister and I. And just my sister and me. So we were essentially raised by our neighbors. So these are also people we wanted to honor and remember. But much of the time was just us. And so we were very close to one another.
Yeah.
And so for us to be split apart in 1980 was also traumatic for her and for me.
Sure.
So, right. And then by the time she immigrated in 2004, when I saw her for the first time in 1999, we couldn't communicate with one another. We didn't know. So that relationship was lost. Right?
Yeah.
So this is a huge price we paid for fleeing and for my mother to come home.
Well, and I just think back to what you said earlier, that no one would leave unless they had to, unless it was the only good option.
Right.
And I think it's important, especially as Americans, again, Americans that don't have immigration in our recent history, to just remember that it's not just this desire to come, hang out in America. There are real things that that people are leaving and fleeing from for their lives, and they're splitting up their families to do it.
They're here because they want to live.
Yeah.
They're here not necessarily to take away resources from people who are already here. They may or may not, but most time they're not. Most time they just want to live. Staying alive is the primary motive, right? And and I think, to be fair, America, and the reason they want to be here is America has this long-standing history of allowing migrants to enter this country. And we have Statue of Liberty as a symbol for the history. And we allow them to come in here to work hard, to establish a new life for themselves and their families. And in the process, contributing to the welfare of this country. Right? And grossly imperfect in terms of our history of treating migrants, but at least we have done it, right? Better than maybe most countries in this world. So I hope we continue to do that in a fair way. Right?
Yes.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. It's an important part of our history, to be sure. And we can't forget that as we move forward. And nothing is perfect. And there are certainly things that we should look back on and feel regret and sorrow and, try to change for the future. Right. But it doesn't mean we have to throw it all away either.
Right. And I think America is completely unique because at least within the last 300 to 500 years, there are no countries like America founded on migrants, based on the energy, ability, and resources of immigrants.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I hope that continues.
Yep, absolutely. Wonderful. I'm just now I have all these questions about your dad. And I know you didn't have the same relationship with him, but
no,
my
you can
goodness,
ask about him.
Well, I'm just when's the memoir about your dad coming out? But he didn't have the same manuscripts, I imagine.
No, he was someone that reminisces of my American grandfather. So all Chinese athlete in college, 3-sport athlete, soccer, basketball, and boxing. Or tracks, I guess. Track and field, I'm sorry. Boxing, if I counted. At that time, I guess didn't count in China. And then just academically just excels in every format. And so my American grandfather graduated from Yale and was also a track and field captain. Right? And then did all this whole 9 yards because he was just so smart, right?
Wow.
And so, so then my father bragged to me that in 1950s, there were no better basketball player in China than he was.
Okay.
And so we had, during those 10 months, of course, he was already into his 80s. We tried to play a game of horse.
And how did that go?
I won. Because he shot like people from 1950s.
Okay.
Those NBA players. So he wasn't lying. They had this foot forward and then set and then shoot, right? There's no these jump shots.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Was his family background, He was obviously very educated, very intelligent. Did he come from a family like that, or was he kind of the first? Okay.
He did.
He was born into that.
His father was principal of high school.
Okay.
And his mother, one of the few amazing women, I guess, for modern Chinese woman per se, had a master's degree in education. They both were educated in Northwestern in Chicago. So, and then went back as Chinese missionaries and also teachers and principals in high school.
Oh, wow.
And so it came from a well-educated family.
Now, was your dad educated in China?
My dad was educated completely in China.
Okay.
Never been outside of China or to America until maybe early 1990s or late 1980s.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And did he speak much English?
No.
Okay.
So that was another barrier between us.
Yeah.
Between him and me, we couldn't communicate very well because my mother stopped speaking Chinese to me in 1980. As soon as we finally settled down in Boston, I lost that language ability. When I visited China in 1990, people had to pick me up from the airport because I didn't know where to go, and then when they were trying to communicate with me, it was like nothing came out.
Yeah.
So I had to relearn Chinese during the next 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. For the memoir.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
And how was that experience?
It was interesting. Again, so I was allowed to experience what my mother experienced in 1950s. And suddenly I'm also this foreigner in my own birth country. And they look at me strangely because I couldn't speak properly. And even though I don't speak with an accent because that was my native language, right? But I clearly was all broken and hard to understand what point I was trying to make. And so that was very difficult for me because that was when I realized I had neither. I mean, I'm not good at either language, right? So, and it was disheartening. And so now, there's nothing I can do to change any of that. It's too late.
Sure.
Right. But for the memoir, I did my best to relearn everything about China, including the language. Right? So.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You're clearly a very successful person, and to have that still as a person that has accomplished so much, to still feel like you don't necessarily belong. I just think it speaks to how integral that piece of ourselves is, to who we are and where we come from and who we come from.
Yes. Where we are born, what will be our first words, and in what tone, in what accent, in what language, and also who are around us. Like from my mother, it was just totally these Westerners and her American parents, right? And really matters to us. And until we understand our own history, our own culture, and then when you stand to lose all of that, or whether you end up have to regain all of that, but that process is painful. And again, no one really wants to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes people say, a lot of people in America or in anywhere in the world, they haven't been anywhere. They just managed to spend all their life or even through all 3 generations in the same town, same place, same surrounding, living hopefully happily. I said, that's actually very fortunate. Well, it's not a bad thing to be able to do that. Yeah.
That's a very interesting perspective, very unique perspective.
It's not like you have to run all over the world to find your home, and that can be a tragedy.
Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate you saying that, because somebody who clearly loves to travel and makes it a priority and talks extensively about how much of a educator I believe travel is. I really appreciate that perspective, that it is a privilege to also be able to stay where you are and to have those roots and not to have to be uprooted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Surrounded by family, friends for generations.
Yeah.
And children. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, you spent 10 years writing a memoir, but that wasn't your full-time job. You've got a lot going on, or you had a lot going on. So what was your, adult life? You came here, you went back into school, you mentioned grad school. So, what did your growing up, the rest of your growing up looked like?
Yeah, so I had to learn English fast. I was allowed to enroll in one of the more prestigious prep school in New England called Milton Academy because all the Perkins family children went there. And this would then attribute to my grandfather, Edward Perkins, who was born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, into one of the bluest blood family in terms of wealth and power. Right? It's all family worth many members who are powerful Congress people and bankers. So they're a lot of money and very powerful. Put in short. So they all went to elite schools. And so I was about to enroll that, and then they were just thinking, this kid doesn't know a word of English, right? And I became their experiment to see if they can introduce foreign students coming to this culture with very little background in terms of language. And so it was a huge struggle. It was extremely lonely. And because I couldn't communicate with many people, most people, and my mother, I couldn't even communicate with my mother because she stopped speaking Chinese to me. But she was very helpful trying to transition me into this culture. And I had a lot of these teachers at Milton Academy were very helpful. But ultimately, it was just a terrifying experience. I tried to write those 500-word essays, right? So I couldn't even write a sentence.
Yeah.
So I chose science. I think in science is actually probably more of international language.
Yeah.
I can understand 1 + 1 = 2. And ultimately I went to college, still struggling in English, so I chose chemistry. But worst thing is I chose organic chemistry. It was a discipline. It was a subdiscipline that I was not very good at because very little math. It was a language, actually. And somehow organic chemistry professor thought I was interested, and they were very good to me and dragged me into their laboratories and teach me how to run reactions. And I was actually good with my hands, just like my mother was very good with her hands. So I decided to go to grad school for organic chemistry, and then I was inspired by all these teachers who helped me along the way. So I thought I wanted to teach too. And that turned out to be a struggle because teaching is yet another form of language. You need to understand how to communicate with people, right? So I learned everything by teaching. Including chemistry. I relearned everything that I missed in college or in grad school by teaching. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that teaching career for about 30 years or so. It depends on how one counts, so where I start counting. And then I eventually had to stop because doing the memoir and teaching became impossible.
Okay.
Memoir was not a weekend evening job anymore. So, and it was taking its toll on me physically and mentally and also emotionally. And so I retired a little early for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, just to reiterate the barrier of language, and here you published this memoir. I mean, it's truly incredible just as an act itself. It's something that most people will never do, period. But to honor a promise that you made to your mother, to stick with it, even though it got very difficult. I just think it's a really incredible journey that you've been on and that you've committed yourself to.
I had a lot of help also. Again, editor, generous publisher, and my American side of family, many of them actually accomplished authors who wrote many books. And so I had a lot of help. And ultimately, it was still my mother's ghost. It was haunting me every time I was trying to walk away from this task. And it became also, like what I was saying earlier, it was a redemptive exercise for me. And I gradually recognized I need to finish to begin my process of healing and to shed my mother's ghost.
Yeah.
And to do so, I had to finish it. And so, so those were all elements that contributed to finally just get it done at all cost.
It's very, very cool. I have one grandfather in particular that I want to write about, but he's gone, and there are a lot of holes to the story that I don't have answers to. So I'm still thinking about and figuring out how to eventually make that happen. It's a life goal, to be sure. So
this is the one from Hungary.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, you knew that.
Yeah, I tried to do some research work.
Yeah, and just again the idea that our stories only live on if those we love continue to tell them and continue to honor them. So, so yeah, you're encouraging me in a lot of personal ways too. Do you have another book in you, or what's next? Do you think you'll write again?
When my mother's last volume came out in 2003, I swore I would never write another memoir, anyone's memoir. You won't be able to convince me.
Yeah.
But what I found at the beginning, about a year and a half ago now, right? So the C.S. Lewis, the publishing company that connected you and me, and asked me to write a lot of these 800-word essays or short stories, which I always hated, right? So, and then I begin to like to exercise these short stories, and then I've been collecting them, even though not all of them are being solicited by these online magazines. I've been collecting them because I realized all the people I've talked to, in the beginning, they were interested in my mother's stories and memoir. But gradually, while that's still being true, but gradually a lot of people were interested in about me.
Yeah.
Why I wanted to do this, and then what was the process like, and about my own experience and understanding and perspectives. And these short stories and essays reflect that. And so I don't believe it's called a memoir, but I think it sounds still like a memoir. So I'm going to try to collect them together, compile them into a book. It will be much shorter than my mother's. I promise that. And so that will be my next project. And that is an ongoing project now.
I love that. So, wonderful. Yeah. You really just fell into this. It wasn't something you planned on. But I do think about the fact that earlier on you said that originally you thought about going to school to be a journalist.
Yes.
So
now I am writing.
It's a real full circle moment for you.
Yes, I appreciate that. And so again, looking back on this exercise, I realized it was a rite of passage for me to go through this hardship and then to finally find my way out of the woods. I don't know if I'm out of the woods or not, but find my way out and realizing that what I thought about in late 1970s. Now it's becoming true, albeit in a different language. Right? So,
who could have predicted the journey?
Yeah. Totally on script.
That's amazing. Well, I do ask every one of my guests a question at the end of each show, which is, through the lens of your experiences, what does compassion mean to you?
That's a great question. I think it comes in a multifold, right? So one is understanding, and understanding meaning understanding the other person's perspective, the other person's journey, the other person's history, and stories. But to understand implies one must listen. And listen carefully of the other person's stories and what the other person has to say. And then while listening, have definitely demonstrate no judgment, even if that perspective or that journey is completely opposite and strange, foreign, or counter to what one believes in, right? Yeah, I think if we do more of that, then we will have less war, and less atrocities, less disaster, man-made disasters.
I agree. I think listening is a very active practice.
Right.
And we don't necessarily think of it in that way. We think of it as kind of this passive thing. Right. But it really takes purpose and focus and intention to do so.
It takes a lot of energy to be able to do so. So I will qualify. Having said all of that, I probably do terribly in all those facets, because I tend to listen and then suddenly I want to tell that person what I think. And that urge is very strong. And to tell that person what I think is already predicated on my own judgment, what I believe in. And so I'm already far gone down that road.
Well, take heart. You are not alone. We are all guilty of doing that. And so it's just about, doing our best, trying.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Recognizing that's important.
Yeah.
So that's a good start.
And we're going to fail, and that's okay.
Right.
Just try again.
Right.
So, yeah. Right. Well, Richard, thank you so much. We've been planning this for months. I'm so excited that we finally got to make it happen. You are such a pleasure to speak with. And I now can't wait to read the memoir. Now that that we've done this, now I can actually sit down and read it, and I'm very excited to do so. So
thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.